The streams are being propagated. It'll be a minute or two, and then it'll be, and then we'll be live. So, um, all right. Be a minute or two, and then it'll be, and then we'll be live. So, um, yeah, looks like we're rolling here right away. Anyway, all right. Be a minute or two, and then it'll be, and then we'll be live. So, yeah, looks like we're rolling here right away. Anyway, all right. Be a minute or two, and then it'll be, and then we'll be live. So, I'm gonna have to figure that out. Why is we looping here? Yeah, looks like we're rolling here right away. Anyway, all right. Be a minute or two, and then live. So, I'm gonna have to figure that out. Why is we looping here? Yeah, looks like. Oh, there we are. All right. Well, 3 o'clock. Right on the button. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Looking forward to talking today. This is Brian and Peter and Caleb from Cologne Baptist Church. Our last Sunday message was on Jesus and the message of personal integrity, on oaths, and on swearing to cover your behind and give your words more weight than perhaps they ought, or perhaps they have because of your conduct. Jesus had a lot to say about this, and Peter brought an awesome message from Matthew 5:33-37, and we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about integrity and the theme of personal integrity and just how important it is in Jesus' mind, and how that affects our day-to-day life as we move in wholeness. The whole message of Jesus is that we would grow in wholeness in our relationship with God, receiving his love, and also with others. Through the gospel, through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, we can know the life-changing, transforming power of Jesus and power of relationship. Peter, it was your message, so why don't you lead us out in our discussion today?
Absolutely. And I think, you got a great summary of it, and how important integrity is to our personhood, and how important integrity is to God, and how it actually is kind of the pathway, and it's hand to hand with being known and being loved. And one of the things that I think, often we get an opportunity to, but I think sometimes we can take it to the extreme. One person kind of came and talked to me, and we can talk about like falling off on the other side of things. Like, you got to be true to, you've heard it said in our culture today, you got to be true to yourself, and often that's used for a cover up for selfish living, or just an excuse for sin, or kind of abdicating responsibilities. That's not what we're going after, right? Like, this is the person who sits there and says, I'm going to leave my family because I want to be more true to myself and do such and such and such. So maybe I should ask the first question of, like, in your experience, what are the difficulties and challenges of growing in integrity and being authentic and whole? Like, what are some of the challenges that you face?
Well, I can tell you, I find it challenging because I like to be liked by people, and I actually like to impress people. I might not always admit that, but I know that that's in me. And to do so, I will sometimes exaggerate. I'll sometimes, you probably could call it a lie. Say something that isn't quite true or is partially true, or I omit some truths. I don't want to look bad. So yeah, I am challenged by this idea that I'm supposed to be totally honest and not in any way, shape, or form portray something, say something that isn't true.
Brian, I can totally relate with that. That's an area that's, I would say, a challenge for me. And I think there are moments when I have come close to what I would call actually pretty honest living. But it's so easy to slip back and to say, just to cover your butt a little bit. Hey, like kind of hedge your bets, and well, we can portray this situation with a little bit of a twist, and it looks a little bit better than perhaps it really is if people had an honest look at it. And
yeah.
and go ahead, Peter.
No, I was gonna say, just facetiously, that doesn't preclude like being tactful and sensitive, right? Like you just sit there, it's like, I love your hair, Caleb. Now that's not
what hair. What hair? Yeah, I loved it too back then.
You know where I'm kind of going off, right? Like I think there's some sensitivity and whatever. That's not what we're talking about. It's actually kind of like you said, being honest with yourself and with others and with God, right? And it can be very difficult. And I think, like you said, the media and the expectations and the worst is I think we're our worst enemies, right? Like, the expectations that we put upon ourselves and we expect of ourselves kind of get in the way of being authentic, that somehow I want to be more than I actually am. And that's a big one. And maybe, like you said, it's to ask that question, like, I said, the gospel is really an invitation to authenticity, right? And that unless you're real, you're not going to experience being loved and be belonging, because there's always going to be that little nagging little voice, like, if God really knew this going on in my life, or my whatever, I wouldn't be loved. That's the reason why we hide. That's the reason why we not authentic, because we're worried that we would be rejected. There's a vulnerability to it, and I think that's the challenge, whether it's with God or with others. But maybe I should ask the question so that as a way of encouragement, how have you experienced wholeness? Have you experienced it's to ask that question, like, kind of belonging and being the gospel loved, is really an invitation and that others, pathway. But maybe I should ask the question so that as a way of encouragement, how have you experienced wholeness?
Well, for me, at some point in my life, I came to the realization that God loves me for who I am and not for what I do. That was a pretty profound, that was now maybe 25 years ago or so, but that was a profound realization for me when it finally got into my heart, because that meant I'm loved for being the child of God and not for being great or perfect or preaching the most excellent sermon or whatever else, or being a great dad or a great husband. And that helped me to not have to pretend to be more than what I am and to be more authentic. And so it really was a gift of God setting me free. That doesn't mean I don't struggle with it anymore. I still do. It's still a constant battle. But there has been quite a bit of healing and freedom to be more authentic since that realization that I am loved for who I am, not for what I do. So that's part of my journey there.
For me, it's that invitation to trust, and that every time you have an opportunity to, I think you expressed it really well, Peter, that it's Jesus is inviting us into relationship. The fact is that God, as creator and as immanent, omnipresent being, he knows everything about us. He knows us better than ourselves, and he knows the depths of our hearts. He knows the depths of our minds, and he knows the details, the deep details of all of our actions. And it's a fearful thing to think about until we realize that God is for us. He's not against us. His heart is not to judge. His heart is not to condemn. His heart is not to belittle us. He wants to see us flourish in the way that he intended us to be as his creatures, reflecting his goodness and his glory. And it's so important that we recognize, I think that's where the cross really comes into play, kind of like you said, Brian, that God loves us for who we are, not for what we do. And the cross of Christ is really important. God gave up his son for us and to cover even the worst of our sin. And the challenge there then is it's an invitation to say, okay, God is for us, even in these deep, dark places, even in the kind of deceptions or the dishonesty that I'm not even necessarily fully aware of. And so integrity is about, character, but it's not something, it really comes from being open and being honest and being willing to be seen for who we truly are. And I think when it comes to integrity and the way that we kind of spin things and the way that the Pharisees definitely spin things is, as you said, Brian, they want the attention and the kind of they want the attention and the praise of man. They want to be recognized. But the fact is that God he already recognizes us. We're already recognized and loved by the greatest being ever. And if we believe it, then we can walk in honesty and say, yeah, I really dropped the ball on this thing, or we can have a personal journey toward integrity. And the fact is that it might cost us a little bit in our personal relationships. We might not have, people might see through, but they'll see the real us at least. And God wants to enter into that part of our life so he can bring us healing. And it really is all about trust, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, maybe one more comment that just comes to mind is, God is so much for authenticity. First of all, because it sets us free and makes us whole and everything, but because lying or being inauthentic causes so much pain, and he just wants to protect us from the pain that lying causes. Like I'm thinking of in the Old Testament, Proverbs chapter 6, it says there's 7 things that God hates, and of the 7 things, 2 are lying. Twice he repeats himself. 2 of the 7 things are lying. Why does God hate lying so much? Because of the damage that it causes to relationships with him and with other people. It is deadly, and so he wants to protect us from that. So it's a very loving thing to tell us to be authentic.
And yeah, I think being authentic and integrity really speaks to the places of our shame, right? While you were talking, there was a different example I was going to give, but experiencing kind of wholeness. I remember the season in which I struggled with pornography and just how defeating that was. And you know what? I remember the moment of victory was the moment that I realized Jesus loved me. That was it. Like, it wasn't like I need to get it all together and things like that. But that was the doorway to healing and growing. That moment that I realized that Jesus was beside me, even as I was broken and unable to get past this sin in my life, Jesus was with me. And I think that, just being that honest and being that authentic grows us. And so, we've talked a little bit about how it spills into our relationship with God, or it spills out of our relationship with God. How is kind of, integrity, authenticity shaped your relationships with others?
That's a good question. I think that the deepest human relationship that I enjoy is with my wife. And I'll tell you, the times when I am not honest or authentic, even in the very little things. She is someone who every person has weaknesses, and I think some people are more prone to kind of fudging on the precise details, or cutting the corners perhaps in our communication, and that is not my wife's problem. She's really good in that, and she's better than me, we'll say that. And so I find that in that relationship, the depth of the relationship and the kind of the unity, the commitment, the permanence of it really provides a strong mirror for me on it's a constant reminder that, hey, Caleb, like, authenticity matters, integrity matters. I can see it in my wife, and I can see what it brings her in terms of her own peace of mind and also her credibility. And so in that relationship, I've had an opportunity to grow, because even though she's better at that than me, we'll say, she also is very loyal and forgiving, and we get to talk about it. I get to practice kind of coming clean and saying, okay, well, I said I was 15 minutes late getting home from work today because I was grabbing fuel or whatever, but the truth is I just didn't leave on time. Like, I'm just going to be honest. And I get a chance to practice that over and over again with her, which is awesome.
Yeah, I would say the same thing in my relationship with Tracy. It is a relationship that is built on trust and honesty, but it's also a process. Yeah, I had to learn, like in the passage you preached on, Peter, on Sunday, it says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And I would often, with good intentions, say, yes, I'll be there. I'll be there this afternoon for the birthday party or whatever. And then something else would come up. And oftentimes I would then not show up. And so my yes wasn't really a yes. So it wasn't really that I was intentionally lying to cover something up, but I was speaking too quickly and my yes became a no. And that's not integrity. I mean, that's in a way, that's a lie. And so I had to learn to be slower to say yes or slower to say no, and make sure that there's integrity. And when I do promise something, that I follow through on it.
I think it's interesting that you both mention the closest, well, of course, your closest relationship, your spouse and stuff like that. I have found that regardless of the relationship, integrity is kind of the doorway to intimacy, and true, like, friendship. And I'm not just talking like, my spouse, but probably some of my closest friends. They're built around this idea of just, having integrity, having authenticity, being able to reveal yourself as who you are. And even that idea of coming alongside and loving the other person as they're loving you, and realizing, and how often you realize, like, I'm struggling with this, and, I'm fearful of that. How often the other person on the other side sits there and says, hey, I totally get it. Maybe our contexts are different, but man, I can totally understand that struggle, and that's not who you are, or you know what, you need to consider this. And those are the things that I realize, like, without our really showing who we are, you don't have that intimacy. You don't have that, true sense of belonging in community.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. I think that it is the gateway to intimacy, and I mean, God is ultimately the one who is seeking intimacy with us, and seeking that we would be walking with him in intimacy, which is just a good way of explaining intimacy is into me see, where we're fully known and we're fully loved. We can't enter that experience until we enter into the experience of being fully known. God already knows, but entering into the experience of that means agreeing with God about what he already sees in us, and then we can walk with him. I'm interested though in getting and you brought it up on Sunday, but perhaps for those who didn't see, I am interested in just seeing how the Pharisees used this matter of oaths. I'm just interested in maybe a quick recap of how the Pharisees used these oaths to excuse their lack of integrity, really, because I think it's such an interesting thing to see how the Pharisees were doing it, and then realize that this is why Jesus is talking, because they got it totally backwards.
Yeah, and that was the thing, right? Like, Jesus wasn't against taking oaths. He was against taking oaths under this pretense of deception, right? Under this pretense of like lying. And we read Matthew chapter 23, where he's actually kind of talking to the guides, where he's talking about the leaders of the time, and just saying, you know what? Hey, you guys are talking about like taking oaths on, the gift on the altar, and that's more binding than the one that you just take against the altar and things like that. And this is more binding, and this isn't binding. And like I said, it just took me back to grade 2, right? Like, cross my heart, hope to die, poke a needle in my eye. I'm telling you the truth, honest. And then we kind of turn around and said, hey, look, man, I'm crossing my fingers. It doesn't count, right? And you just sitting there's like, oh, you swore an oath on such and such of the temple. Well, that no, it's just just a gift. It doesn't count. And Jesus is like, are you kidding me? You're degrading God's name, because all of it has God's name on it. Mm-hmm. And 2, this was an oath made under the pretense of you are actually going to lie. You are actually not intending from the beginning to carry out your word. And so he kind of brings it back and says, all your oaths, regardless of what you're making oaths to, is predicated by your integrity, right? And that in the Old Testament, oaths were made in the presence of God, seeking God, and as God is my witness. And it was a formal declaration of truth and intention. And God wasn't against that. God was always against, if you're going to do that with integrity, do that with honesty.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And, it comes down to the question, do you want the appearance? Do you want the appearance of righteousness, of being right? Or do you want the substance of it? And if you want the substance of it, you have to be willing to forfeit the appearance, because we're actually not really righteous. And the Pharisees, they were like, well, I'm not going to act righteous, but how can I look righteous? Well, so that's what these oaths, they're gonna fulfill that. We can keep God's law on the outside, but totally disregarding it on the inside, and have our cake and eat it too. But Jesus says you got to do better than that if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Absolutely. Well, let's wade into some murkier waters.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. One of the things that I talked about was integrity in this time of like craziness. Like, there's just so many things kind of going on, the swirl, social media, and it's so hard to figure out exactly what's kind of going on out there. What is your experience, or maybe what is your advice to people? Like, how do we hold on to integrity in the midst of conflicting information and things kind of going on? What would you say to that? Or maybe like, how are you navigating some of those things?
Well, we talked about that a little bit in our life group after the service on Sunday. And for me personally, it is to be careful how I use facts, or what appears to be facts, statistics. There's an old saying that you can prove anything with a statistic, even the opposite. So be careful, because you can always take numbers and prove that, maths are good, or you can take numbers to prove that maths are bad. And so I'm just, for myself, saying I'm going to be very careful how I use things that appear to be factual in making arguments for or against anything, and just say, well, I kind of lean towards this way, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's one area where I try to be have integrity and not make statements that I really can't be 100% sure about.
And I mentioned that, like, maybe I didn't make it as clear, but it's crazy to me of all of the different facts and all the different people saying different things. And I think, like you said, you don't. I guess I bring it back to the time when I talking about oaths, accepted my professional engineering papers, and in order to do that, we actually had to go through the code of ethics and code of what conduct as a professional engineer. And it was very, very clearly stated that you will not speak beyond your capabilities. You will not speak beyond your expertise. And often, even as an engineer, your expertise was fairly narrow. And it's like, the crazy thing is that there's just so much information out there spoken by all sorts of different people. And I find it a little dizzying, and I appreciate what you said, Brian. It's like, sometimes it is to admit that I'm not so sure, and maybe there's a humility to it. Maybe there's a realization that a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are way more complex. You were going to say something, Caleb, or no, Brian? Yeah.
No, I really thought that was a fantastic piece to bring in. Is that ethical kind of framework where you don't speak outside of your area of expertise, and you recognize the limits of your knowledge, and you're quiet. And I mean, one of the challenges that sociologists have talked about, and it's become very obvious, is the whole shift of knowledge and the whole shifting of the lines of, well, who is the expert really, and who are the people that get to speak, and social media gives everybody a platform, and there's a lot of voices out there, and the ones who it's great in one hand because there are some people who have a lot of expertise, and it's giving them a platform, and it allows people to learn, in new ways and have greater access. But there's also a lot of people and a lot of people who are not experts and who are speaking and gaining a following, and they perhaps shouldn't be. And the call to integrity is really like to know your boundaries. Is this are you the one who should be speaking into this? And is this a conversation worth having? And the temptation in our day, I think, when it comes to integrity, is to substitute. We think that we need to bring about, victory or reform through kind of a top-down, speaking louder, speaking more aggressively, and into the, inserting our voice or our viewpoint into the discussion. And but I think the way of Jesus is so different. If anyone was an expert, it was him, but he didn't assume to be able to speak to anybody, or let me go back. He didn't broadcast 24/7 and say, listen, 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 listen. He spoke the truth when the opportunity was there, and he left the results with the Lord. And it was a more subversive sort of way of being and doing things. And integrity, I think, where you're willing to sacrifice character or sacrifice the proper procedure in order to seize the power or seize the moment. And I think that's one area where, especially when it comes to the messages we're portraying, there's a lot of temptation there to go to reach for power instead of to reach for to maintain maintain integrity and an ethical approach to some of these questions. Yeah.
What I find difficult is when there are what appears to be sincere, well-meaning experts who disagree, right? And that's not just when it comes to COVID. I mean, I see that in theology. You have sincere evangelical scholars who are way more knowledgeable than I am, and some of them are Calvinists, others are Arminians, right? And that's confusing. But on the other hand, I find it just humbling, and I think it's honest to say, well, there are some areas where we just can't know for sure. Yes, you can be convinced in your own mind, but be very humble with that conviction, because there are experts who would disagree with you anyway. So, yeah.
And then how would you like, you want to get, make any comments around the idea of, Josh, we talk about the story of Joshua chapter 5, where Joshua meets the man with the sword, and the man with the sword is the angels of the armies of God, commander of the armies of the angels of God. And he says, I'm not on either of your side, realizing there is what does it mean to be on God's side? Maybe that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be on God's side in the midst of stuff like this?
That's a great story. It's a great Bible story where Joshua's going to war, and he's out there in the morning, and he sees a man with a sword, and he approaches him and says, "Hey, are you for us, or are you for them? I don't recognize you, but you got a sword, so you're obviously here to do something." And he says, I'm for neither. I'm for the Lord. And that is a great question when it comes to integrity, because integrity is about, are we for us, and are we about assuming, kind of taking things that will serve us? What's going to serve us? That's the question that question will lead you away from integrity. What will serve us? And are you going to serve us? Your interest is in yourself. And the angel of the Lord says, no, I'm not for you, and I'm not for you. And if you think that just because you belong to the Lord and the Lord's called you, that he is for you to the point where you don't have to worry about whether you're for God, well, that's backwards. But if our mind is, what does it mean to be for the Lord, for truth? How can my life serve that goal? How can my life be conformed to that? Then the transformation is going to be on our end, and we will find ourselves growing in integrity, because that's just who the Lord is. It's like you said, what you worship and what you look at with the desires of your heart, that's what you become. That's what you grow to become like. And it's a great story. I love that you brought that in. And we just need to be asking, okay, right, just because I'm a Christian and I belong to God, that doesn't mean that I can forget about what God might require of me or how I can represent him. That's still a thing we have to strive toward. And God does serve us, but he's calling us to be like him and to serve him with our integrity.
Yeah, and I think it's especially important and applicable to churches, to faith groups, to
Absolutely.
Believers.
Oh, man.
Because I've been through enough battles, or whatever you want to call it, where it was us against them, where there was a group that was for the pastor, a group that was against the pastor, a group that was for a building project, a group that was against the building project. And pretty soon the question, a new person comes into the church, are you for us or for them? Are you going to be part of our group? Are you going to see it my way? And things get, into these camps and fighting against each other. And that's where I think we need to be for the Lord and for the body of Christ, which is one body that's undivided. And so we're really, we have to have that focus. Otherwise, we will end up being in camps fighting each other.
Those are great answers. I really enjoyed that idea of are you asking God to serve me and our purposes or their purposes? But, and so easy for even within the church community to start kind of putting factions and, are you on this faction, this division, this, that? And yet, I think I would just continue to bring this back to, I think what the people of God have always done in times of difficulty, in times of uncertainty, in times when there's conflict and things of that nature, they just bring it back to God. They just bring it back in prayer, whether it's Daniel, or Nehemiah or Jeremiah when they're in exile, or, the Second Chronicles when the people are doing crazy things. If my people would humble themselves and return to me, I would heal their land. They just come to God in prayer. They come to God in prayer and just seek. And they don't try to sit there and say, I want to fully understand all the dynamics that are going into our exile and what's kind of going on. They sit there like, God, you have a plan. And, Jeremiah tells the people that God speaks, I have a plan for you to bless you and to heal you, to for your good. And, most people don't understand that God's speaking to that while they're being carried off into exile, right? Like people are, they're prisoners of war, for lack of a better way of putting it, and God's speaking that to them. And I think that kind of blows me away in many respects. Well, we're coming up to kind of our time. Is there anything else that kind of stood out to you guys that you're like, man, I need to speak about this?
Well, Jesus says, let your yes be yes, let your no be no. Anything more than this is from the evil one. And anything more than just saying your simple word it's about manipulation. You're trying to get someone else to believe something more than the facts instead of letting your character speak for itself. And that's been a good challenge for me. And the thought that it's not only maybe inappropriate to use our words in that way, it's actually from the enemy, like it's from the devil. It comes from the desire of the devil to have to boost self and to promote self instead of just being what it is. That's been a thought that has occurred to me kind of regularly. Like if I'm having to justify myself or to add more weight by my words, kind of conjure up some credibility, then I'm kind of trying to do the devil's work, really, instead of just keeping it simple, letting it be what it is. That's a really good reminder for me out of this.
Yeah, it's why the Bible calls the devil the father of lies, and kind of reminds me of in German you say that lies have short feet and they can't outrun the truth.
Yeah.
So, you kind of like that thought.
That's great. I like that too.
And I think Jesus brings it to such clarity a little later in verse 45. It says, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Yeah. And that, I think, is contrast to the line you talked about. Beyond this, it comes from the evil one. And what a sobering words that we can either mimic Satan or we can mimic God. And sometimes we forget that's the choice in life. We will either mimic the lies of Satan or we will live in the truth of God. That's a great word to kind of end off with.
Yep.
Yeah, you seem like you had something to say, Mr. Caleb.
What did Jesus tell the Pharisees? You're the children of your father, the devil, and it's his desires you do. And here, I forgot that he if you do this so that you may be children of God, unless your righteousness surpasses the scribes and the Pharisees. I just keep coming back to that line in this series. It's been really good.
Yes.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, thanks for joining us for Living in the Scriptures Live. Blessings, y'all.
Amen.
Yeah. And if you follow, if you've been appreciating this and you've been watching this, you can find our Sunday services at, just if you look on McLaurin Baptist Church, look on Facebook, search for that. Our Sunday services are streamed live there. You're welcome to join us in here. This next section, we're going through 3 chapters of Jesus' teaching on basically life and what his kingdom looks like in the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew's Gospel. And we'd love for you to join us. And we're also here every Wednesday to recap the sermon at 3 p.m. Feel free to reach out to any one of us on whatever platform you found this video, and we'd love to connect with you. So, thanks for joining us.